we've been in business quite a few years now, about coming up, well, from the turn of the century, really. So that sounds old, doesn't it? Since 2000 we started. And the majority of that time we've been in the business of self-service, end-user request management. But more recently, we've started to identify that the business of being in self-service, there was a big piece of missing of our puzzle that we were helping customers with, and that was around knowledge. And we identified that the problem that people were facing within organizations was this: the digital workers of today are really being held back by the lack of knowledge. In other words, the information available to help them do their job on a daily basis. So we started to do a bit more digging around the last 5 years, looking at more analytics and talking to various consultancy organizations. And we identified these 4 areas, certainly constrained by silos. So often, you know, as a user, where do you go to get information within the organization? We've got lots of different areas to find that information and accessing it, and how do I make my decisions? That was leading to sort of misinformation sometimes. And also, when you're struggling to find information, as a digital worker, as a person in the organization, that can then start to affect your productivity and your performance and the way that you then might deal with your customers. So that can have a negative impact, even though the information is for internal use. The way that you become productive in your organization, that then reflects out to your customers. So your employee experience can then affect your customer experience. And of course, now we've got the Gen Z organization coming into our workplace. And they are now starting to say, well, this is not how we work. This is not how we want to work. The way that we access information, the way that we do our jobs and so forth is now putting an extra strain on that knowledge, where we get information, how we update information, and how we search for it as well. And of course, people then say, well, we've got knowledge bases, we've got lots of documentation, we've got information. But that's only the tip of the iceberg we've found. A lot of the information that people have in an organization is in the people's heads. It's what we call tacit knowledge. I'll come on to that a little bit later. So it's, you know, how to get that information. You always go and say, well, how do I do this? Well, go and ask Bob. He's been here for the last 30 years, and he'll tell you. So it's that area that we've been seeing. And of course, the root causes of this, these silos of information, they're often in systems and applications, knowledge sources, etc. There's lots of desperate information out there. And it's how do the users go and find it? Often they are disjointed user interfaces as well. So again, the more applications that are out within an organization, there's more interfaces, there's more user, you know, I've got to go to this portal for that portal for this, and so on and so forth. So that just is growing more and more. And of course, now the proliferation of apps on our phones is starting to add to that as well. And of course, as I've already mentioned, the Gen Z, they very much want to use these applications. They want to search and use natural language to find things and the way they do their jobs. But of course, the bigger problem is that knowledge in people's heads. There's not an incentive to get that information out of people's heads and put it into a system. So how do you get that tacit knowledge? How do you get that knowledge from people's heads that have been working in the organization for a long time into a system that can be then reused and be searched on very easily? And people are not willing to share that information. People are often saying, well, if I've got the knowledge, I'm in power, I'm important. People have to come to me to get that information. And of course, that's not an intuitive way. That's certainly not a productive way of maximizing those people's information and putting it back into the system and into the business for people to access. And this is a stat that we saw from Gartner, actually. So they did a survey. I think there was a good number of people within there. But of those people surveyed, 47% of them said that they struggled to find information on a daily basis to effectively do their job. So nearly half of those people surveyed were saying they struggled to do their job because they couldn't have access to information within the business. So that was a huge stat that we identified with. Oops, these are going a bit funny. But that knowledge, let's just draw this up quickly. So these ducks are meant to swim around, but basically what these are knowledge mountains, basically, islands of information that you've got structured knowledge. So those are your knowledge bases, your knowledge articles. Maybe they're in your service desk, articles in your HR system, etc. You've got unstructured knowledge as well. Unstructured knowledge could be just SharePoint documents on a drive somewhere. They could just be an HR policy document or the workbook that is given out to users when they join. And transient knowledge is things such as maybe on your service desk you've identified a major incident. It's only going to be, hopefully around for a short period of time, but that's knowledge that people, need to know about for a certain period of time, and then it'll disappear. And then, as I said, there's that tacit knowledge. This is stuff that's in people's heads. This is stuff that people have just learned, they know about. It's the information that they have to do their job, that they know about the organization. And people that are coming into that are trying to search for that. They're having to swim around those islands of information. Where do I go to get that information? How do I find it? Who's got it? Who's the experts in this? And so on and so forth. And that's what's taking up the time. That's that 47% of people saying, don't have access to the information to do my job. So that knowledge, doing all of that leads to downtime and to cost. So this is another really interesting stat that we saw from Gartner. 65% of digital workers are frequently asking co-workers, colleagues, on how to do something, how to get issues resolved, typically around IT-related systems and access to information. But they are going to other people to say, how do I do this? That's a huge percentage. So think about the cost of that. There's the downtime to me as the person who doesn't know how to do something. But then I go and interrupt somebody to say, how do you do this? And of course, you then multiply that out. It just keeps growing and growing. So that's a huge stat that we identified with. But also that structured knowledge that people have in their knowledge articles, their knowledge bases, etc., that quickly becomes outdated if you don't have a process for updating it. In other words, people that are accessing it, is it valid? Is it relevant? Is it up to date? Does it give me the answer to my question quickly and efficiently? You've got to keep that updated all the time. And how do you do that? And that's a process and something that takes a bit of time in an organization to do that. But as I said, often the information that's being searched for doesn't exist in those knowledge articles, those knowledge bases. Somebody once told me, they said, we did all this work on our knowledge base, huge amount of effort and time and so forth. When we then surveyed the users inside our organization, they all said, well, that's not the information we're searching for. Why did you build that? This is the information we want. So a lot of time was wasted on managing that knowledge base, and that's not what was being searched for by the users. So that becomes a difficult area. And users, where do they get that information from? How do they get it out of people's heads? Who do they go to? And as I said as well, is that co-workers are not willing to share that knowledge that they have in their head. So you've got to try and find a way to incentivize them, get them to be participating in that. And of course, the usual thing, people leaving the business take that knowledge with them if it's in their heads. However, a bigger stat is what happens when you recruit somebody into your business. You spend a lot of time and money and effort on recruitment fees, you get them into your organization, and then they spend an enormous amount of time and effort, sometimes months I've heard, on just trying to work out, how do I do my job? Where do I go for this? What happens if I want to access this system and so on? So there's a lot of time and cost wasted on onboarding somebody, and you want them to be as productive as possible, as quickly as possible, when you've spent all that time and money on them. Yes, there's information leaving your building, but what about those people that have just joined? How do you get them feeling this is a great company to be part of, especially those Gen Zs that come in at an early stage? So those digital workers, getting them onboarded very quickly and access to information is quite key. That's that Gartner stat that I was referring to. So what can we do about it? Well, firstly, start to think about building a sharing knowledge culture within your organization, i.e. try and break those silos down, i.e. don't have lots of different systems for a start, but also make sure that everybody participates in knowledge sharing, knowledge creation, adding to that knowledge base, and make sure that everybody is aware that it's part of their job role and responsibility to impart knowledge that they've got in their head, rather than trying to keep it all to themselves, and capture that tacit knowledge. So try and find ways where those employees in the business that have that knowledge in their head have a means to easily update systems and add to the knowledge base, add to the culture of knowledge sharing. And also treat it as a network. It's an organic living organism within your business. As I said before, those big knowledge bases quickly become out of date if you do not update them, you create them, keep the information relevant to what the staff are looking for on a daily basis. You've got to find ways to fill the gaps of the knowledge. So in other words, looking at what people are asking for on a daily basis and saying, right, we need to focus our efforts in this particular area because we can see a trend. People are searching for this type of information. Of course, it becomes much easier if you start to use things like natural language interfaces to do this rather than sort of keyword searching. You can start to get a view as to how people are accessing knowledge and what sort of areas are missing in your business. And you start to overlay these existing knowledge streams. So structured knowledge, yes, there's a whole big practice around structured knowledge bases and updating and managing and authoring them and so on and so forth. But what about all that data that's sitting in shared drives, on your SharePoint drives, on people's hard drives and so on and so forth? You need to plug that into this knowledge stream as well. And I mentioned those transient knowledge bases. So things like your incidents on your service desk. If there's a major incident, plug that in, make that available as part of the search. Make it available saying, I've got a problem with Teams today. Well, don't worry, we know we've got a major incident happening. Don't bother trying to log a ticket. But that could easily apply to HR. It could be, something's happened on HR, maybe something within the corporate environment you want to make available as a piece of knowledge that's only available for a certain period of time. So think of those other streams of knowledge that are transient that you want to plug into this as well. And clearly that tacit knowledge. This is probably one of the biggest areas that we're seeing organizations struggling with. It's how to get that information from people's heads and make it available to search for. And so what we do is we say unify that experience, allow people just to use natural language to search across all of those. So they don't need to know where they just use one interface. Maybe that's Microsoft Teams. Maybe it's a web chat within your corporate intranet and so forth. But it goes across all of those aspects. Unify the search experience across that. But then also look to use generative AI. And what I mean by this is let's take an example of, you might have, this is maybe a silly example, but it proves the point. If you've got, say, a rental agreement or for your lease agreement for an apartment, and somebody says, can I keep a pet lizard in my apartment? In the lease agreement, in the rental agreement, it might say, have a big section about, yes, you can keep pets and so on and so forth. But when I get the answer back using this approach, it will say to me, yes, you can keep your pet lizard as part of that. I'm overemphasizing the point, but what it means is that as a user searching for information, the answer I get back relates to the question I physically asked. That means I start to get more confident that the answers I get back are relevant to me, and I'm going to use it more and more. And that means I get trust in the system. And so it's not like I have to then go and read through a long, big PDF document to try and find the area about pets and understand it and so forth. It's done that interpretation for me. Yes, by all means, make sure that you do a citation so that you can go back to the original source. That's another key aspect that you should do as part of these processes. But using generative AI on top of the knowledge that you've got where you found an answer and convert it into something that's as meaningful to the context of the question I asked is quite important, we find. So building a scalable digital workforce is the other thing. Using these digital assistants, you might have multiple digital assistants. You might have specific assistants built into applications that you want to make available. And this allows your natural language searching capabilities that you can embed in applications. Maybe it's Microsoft Teams, maybe you've got a specific assistant that's for a specific knowledge sector. So there's lots of different ways you can do this using these digital assistants. And so our solution that we do is looking at this as a network. We try to plug in all these different aspects to it. We use conversational access. So again, it's not another portal. Users are very comfortable with typing natural language into an engine to get answers back now. And that gives you a far better way of diagnosing the types of things that people are searching for, or maybe where there's gaps in your knowledge, because you can follow the conversation rather than trying to do analytical data mining. You literally just look at a conversation, it's a transcript. It's really easy to find that information. but also making sure that everybody plays a role in this, using the crowdsourcing. And what we mean by this is saying, when you ask a question and there can be no answer found in your knowledge sources, then let's put it out to the crowd. Maybe you've got some specific experts in the business, maybe you've got experts in HR, finance, or marketing, etc. Then pass that question to them and get them to answer it. But let the crowd also chime in with that and say, oh yes, but the expert says this, however, in the Manchester office, that's not how it works, or in the real world, that's not how it works. So you get a lot more context to those answers, and you can build up on those, but ensuring that the whole community is participating in that process. That's another aspect that we really try to push through this incentivization, and that's where we bring in the gamification of this, ensuring that staff feel that they are participating for a reason. They're earning points. Points maybe equal prizes. Prizes might be take a half a day off, or maybe we've got a corporate social responsibility program in our organization. So the more people use the system, the more money we're going to give to our chosen charity this quarter. And you can incentivize people. Maybe it's answering questions, maybe it's asking questions, and so on. So we're looking at more and more of these where we can plug into platforms as part of your corporate social responsibility program. Maybe it's monetization through tokenization, etc. But there's a big, strong emphasis on gamification to ensure that people are wanting to participate in this process. So we bring all that together. You got down on the left-hand side all your knowledge sources, plug them into the network, use different means to allow people to search from, use these conversational flows, which are then driving the user down through a process. And there's, that could be entirely under your control as to how you would like that user to be driven through that process, whether it's just a simple search using ChatGPT related type context, or whether it's a very structured conversation, you take them down a decision tree. But the way people access that as well is through whatever means. You might have one day they're accessing it through their Microsoft Teams, maybe another day they're actually talking into their phone to get access to information or find out what their next job is, and so on. Because what we're also doing is we're plugging into those other applications, what we call the process execution venues, which are your applications that run your business. That could be your SAP systems, your service desk tools, HR systems, and so on and so forth. So when people might say, how much holiday do I have left? It says, well, you've got 6 days left. Do you want to book a holiday? Those types of things. And then you just go straight into booking the holiday there and then, rather than having to push them off to another process and so on. And also maybe what you could start to do is be proactive to say, by the way, 2 months before the end of the year, you've got 15 days left on your holiday. You need to start thinking about taking some holiday, for example. Those types of things that people would like to do, because we plug in all these knowledge sources, all these applications into this knowledge network. And you can see there that we are using large language models to participate in this. Not exclusively, but we are using them, and we have an open platform. And that's the other key thing. Clearly, the last few days proves this out, that you need to have an open platform, not just be specific to using one certain large language model. And the personas that are people accessing, those are different channels, whether it be Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp, and so on and so forth. So that's what we refer to as the knowledge network. So why make the change? Well, clearly, having the shortcomings of your knowledge management, you need to start plugging in that tacit information, augmenting that additional knowledge bases with the know-how that's in people's heads. And you can do that through this gamification. So when people ask questions, push it out to the business. Get people to participate in that. And what it does is it then starts to reward them by saying, yes, you've answered these number of questions, so you've earned X number of points. As I said, maybe that equals a prize. Maybe that goes to your corporate social responsibility program as part of that. Maybe ultimately even goes into individual wallets, and they can monetize that if so be it. But that's where we start to look at that gamification. And what you can start to do is put up these incentives to say, okay, somebody's asked a question, it's gone off to a particular expert in the organization, but then the rest of the business can come in and say, yes, but in this example, maybe this is a better way of doing it, and so on and so forth. So you get a very rich conversation going with lots of different ideas and answers to a specific question. Once you get those, people start voting on them and saying, yeah, that was a great question. No, that wasn't a very good answer, and so on and so forth. So again, you're getting the crowd, the community, to participate on enriching that information and validating it and making sure that it's right. And of course, the key thing here is, if you go back to that expert that might have been asked the question, how would you have done it in the past? Pre-COVID, you'd walk down the corridor, maybe go to the kitchen, find someone and say, how do you do this? You ask them the question. But you think about how many times that person gets asked that same question, and every day, I've answered this question all the time, everybody keeps coming and asking. What this means is if they answer it once, the next time somebody asks a very similar question, they're going to get that answer that that expert has put in. And then, of course, not only that, they can see what other people have done against that question and validate. So, oh, right, yes, the expert says this, but Mary in accounts says this. Actually, I prefer Mary's answer. And that's what you get as you start to get this blended. It's a bit like Stack Overflow for the corporate environment. And it's all about that continual improvement of your knowledge, capturing that tacit knowledge very quickly and easily. But once you've got it, once you've got all that information and you've started to get the crowd to add to the context of a particular question and answering it, you get these so-called expert answers. What you can now do is convert all of those answers. Maybe you've got 20 particular answers. You then say, out of those 20, I'm going to take 10 of them, and I'm now going to construct a single certified answer that we're then going to publish back into our knowledge management, our knowledge network. And that's where we use the large language model to then provide that information and construct a unified answer from all of the different people in the business. And then you can say, right, now I'm going to go and update my HR system. I'm going to go and update our service desk, for example, or I'm just going to update a Word document and plug this in at the end and update it, etc. But we're using the large language models to help with that. So it's not about just generative AI, it's about using people in the loop and ensuring that you've got access to information very quickly and easily, plugging the gaps within your knowledge organization to ensure that your experts, the people in the business, are not constantly being badgered. How do you do this? How do you do this? And of course, in our remote working that we have today, it's very difficult to just wander down the corridor now or to the kitchen to say, how do you do this? You know, the only way you can really do it if you're in a remote working world is raise another service desk ticket. And of course, I think it's roughly, Gartner says it's about $20 a ticket to manage. So if people are raising lots of tickets just to ask questions, that's a huge cost on your service desk. So something you want to try and avoid. So I'm going to take questions now. I'm a little bit longer, but either take questions now or come and speak to us afterwards. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you.